Good morning. It's May 23rd here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with South Korea's launching of its homegrown space rocket, Nuri. Nuri will once again shoot for the stars for the third time on Wednesday, but this time it's carrying a commercial-grade satellite. On Tuesday, a group of South Korean experts will inspect the radioactive water storage tanks and purification system at the Fukushima nuclear plant. They say they'll check with their own eyes to make sure the inspection is sufficient. And South Korea and the EU celebrated their 60th anniversary of diplomatic ties in Seoul, where the leaders of the two sides vowed for a deeper cooperation. South Korea's homegrown space rocket Nuri is now being positioned on the launch pad ahead of its third launch tomorrow. And the launch itself is expected to lead to a paradigm shift to a more lucrative aerospace industry. Our Lee Soo-jin starts us off this morning.
South Korea's aerospace sector may soon emerge as a new money-making business. The third launch of the Nuri rocket on May 24th includes participation from the private sector, including from Hanwha Aerospace. The private company was selected to receive a so-called technology transfer as part of the government's efforts to bolster the domestic aerospace industry. Hanwha will now receive a technology boost from the government, which is expected to spur further participation from the private sector, ushering in a new and more lucrative aerospace industry in South Korea. The global aerospace industry is expected to continue expanding with a predicted value of $1 trillion in 2040. An increase in investment in domestic aerospace companies will boost R&D, leading to a plethora of economic benefits.
The aerospace industry encompasses all industries related to space exploration, such as the construction and operation of launch vehicles and satellites, as well as the development and supply of satellite services, therefore having significant added economic value.
There are already domestic startups in the aerospace industry that have begun to develop their own space technology. Domestic rocket startup InnoSpace became the first private company in the country to successfully launch a rocket. Video footage shows InnoSpace's own suborbital rocket lifting off from Brazil on March 19. The increase in homegrown space technology will help reduce astronomical costs and barriers to entry into the space industry. On the day of the launch, stock prices of companies in related industries such as Korea Aerospace Industries closed up 2.46%, despite the nation's main Kospi bourse ending down 0.69%. Investment options in the private aerospace sector are also becoming diversified. Hanwha Asset Management offers the only ETF in the nation that invests in domestic space companies.
Nuri rocket's third launch is expected to lead to the participation of more private companies in the space industry, with more developing their own satellites, marking the beginning of a domestic space industry led by private companies.
As more private companies partake in aerospace R&D, space services and technologies may become commercialized, creating more added value for the economy as a whole. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
We're just a day away from the first launch of a commercial-grade satellite on the Nuri space rocket. And South Korea has come a long way since 1993 to reach this point. Our Kim Jung-sil looks back at the past 30 years.
It all began in 1993 when South Korea's first science rocket was launched. Founding member and former president of the Korea Aerospace Research Institute looks back on that moment 30 years ago.
I think it was a very important launch because it was the first step for the Korea Aerospace Research Institute to develop a rocket that would be used in space research. We had a mere 20 members on the team, and when it was put together and launched successfully, we were all thrilled and excited. I can still feel that moment like it was yesterday.
And 9 years later, the first liquid propulsion rocket was launched. As the rockets got bigger, the need to make the engine liquid was vital, as it allows delicate control of the thrust, and another important reason.
The solid rocket can be easily transferred to the military purpose. So obviously, this may cause some international conflict of interest. So in order to avoid that kind of international situation, Korea decided to develop liquid rocket engine.
In 2013, South Korea's first satellite launch vehicle, Nuri, went up into space. It was jointly developed by South Korea and Russia.
When we were developing the KSR-3, North Korea tried to launch a satellite using its Taepodong-1 technology. It failed, of course, but back then, the South Korean government also wanted to launch a satellite as soon as possible. So we needed the help of other countries. Russia, in this case, provided us the first stage rockets, while South Korea developed the second stage rocket.
The successful launch of Nuri paved the way for Nuri, a space launch vehicle that's 100% South Korean technology. Not only is the rocket made in Korea, but the satellites are Korean as well.
And the Nuri now carries 8 satellites for practical application, such as ground observation or constellation mission and so on. So the third launch will be the first real-world application for the Nuri.
Fewer than 10 countries in the world have this technology, and South Korea hopes that Nuri's journey will be a stepping stone for South Korea to secure a global leading edge in space exploration. 김정실, Arirang News.
Over in Japan, a South Korean team of experts will dive into an official on-site inspection of the Fukushima wastewater today. Now, the team will inspect the radioactive water storage tanks and the purification process at the Fukushima plant. Our Shin Ha-young tells us more.
A team of 21 South Korean experts on Tuesday will visit the Fukushima nuclear power plant to begin the inspection of water stored at the site. This comes amid lingering concerns about the safety of the wastewater from the crippled plant ahead of its planned release into the sea. The inspection team will be at the site for 2 days, with day 1 focusing on examining the so-called ALPS purification system that removes radioactive substances from the contaminated water before it's released into the ocean. On Wednesday, the team will visit a chemistry research lab at the plant to assess the facilities and the processes used to determine radionuclides in the wastewater. Ahead of the inspection, the team held a meeting on Monday with officials from the Tokyo Electric Power Company, which runs the Fukushima power plant, and officials from Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, as well as members of the Nuclear Regulation Authority. During the meeting, the South Korean team reaffirmed the list of facilities requiring inspection. It also requested inspection records of each facility and data on the contaminated water before and after filtration through the ALPS system. After completing the 2-day on-site inspection in Fukushima, the team is scheduled to hold a more in-depth meeting with Japanese officials in Tokyo on the last day, May 25th, ahead of their return. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Wrapping up his busy week of diplomacy, President Yoon hosted European Union leaders for summit talks here in Seoul as they celebrate the 60th anniversary of diplomatic ties this year. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
President Yoon hosted European Council President Charles Michel and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen for a summit in what was his final event of this super week of diplomacy on Monday. And among his top priorities for improving bilateral relations, he saw the need to expand cooperation in 3 specific fields.
첫째, 우리는 그린, 보건, 디지털 분야 3대 파트너십을 강화해 나가기로 했습니다. 한 EU 그린 파트너십 체결을 통해 포괄적 기후 환경 분야 협력을 확대하기로 하였으며 한 EU 보건 비상 대비 대응에 대한 행정 약정 체결을 통해 글로벌 보건 위기 대응을 위한 공조 체제를 확립했습니다.
Our new green partnership will boost cooperation in areas like renewables and green technology. Importantly, through this partnership, we will strengthen our cooperation on the safe operation of nuclear power, among other issues.
This is the first time in 11 years for both European Council and Commission presidents to visit Seoul for a bilateral meeting. And this comes as the two sides celebrate the 60th anniversary of their diplomatic ties, which have been a strategic partnership since 2010. According to the joint statement released following the summit, an agreement was made on opening talks for South Korea to take part in the Horizon Europe Research and Innovation Program. This is an EU member program for advancing science and technology with a budget of more than $100 billion until 2027. Also discussed was security, specifically Russia's invasion of Ukraine and North Korea's missile and nuclear provocations, issues that South Korea and the EU have to deal with due to their proximity to those threats. Both sides reiterated the need for cooperation with a strategic dialogue at foreign ministerial level established to enhance cooperation on global peace and security. In the meantime, the Council President acknowledged South Korea's role in global affairs so far.
In a world profoundly shaken by Russia's war on aggression in Ukraine, Russia's blatant violation of the UN Charter and the international law, you condemned this war of aggression from the start. It is all to your credit, and it shows once again the strength of our bond.
The summit was followed by dinner where the European leaders were treated to Korean-style beef ribs. There, the 60th year of bilateral diplomacy was celebrated while toasting solidarity in freedom, peace, and prosperity. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea and China held a director-level diplomatic meeting in Seoul on Monday on talks to improve their bilateral ties. Choi Yong-jun, the director of the Foreign Minister's Northeast Asia Bureau, sat down with his Chinese counterpart Liu Jin-sung, who's visiting Seoul. Choi emphasized the importance of developing a mature and healthy South Korea-China cooperative relationship based on mutual respect. China's foreign ministry said that Liu explained Beijing's firm stance on China's interests, which highly likely includes its concerns over President Yoon Suk-yeol's comment during an interview with Reuters last month regarding Taiwan. The meeting marks the first face-to-face meeting between diplomats of the two countries since January last year. An anti-terrorist operation has been launched in a border city in Russia after a group of anti-Putin Russian nationals launched an attack inside Belgorod. Our Lee Seung-jae has the details.
A group of anti-Putin Russian nationals has claimed responsibility for an attack in Russia's southwestern city of Belgorod, prompting the region's governor to launch an anti-terrorist operation to hunt down those responsible for the attack.
The current situation is that 8 people were injured. According to information from the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Defense, there were no civilian casualties. Once again, the situation is tense and remains so. A counter-terrorist operation was declared. Many restrictions are in place.
The Russian governor added that a large part of the local population had evacuated the area. Moscow has placed the blame on Ukraine, claiming that the group of Russian nationals has aligned itself with the Ukrainian army. However, while Ukraine does acknowledge that Russian citizens in 2 separate paramilitary groups had carried out an operation in the area, it acted independently and without any orders from Kyiv. The groups, who call themselves the Freedom of Russia Legion and the Russian Volunteer Corps, said in a Telegram post that they had liberated a settlement in the Belgorod region. Russian authorities are still searching for those responsible for the attack, which led to 8 people being injured after a village was shelled. Fighting also damaged 3 houses and a local administrative building. According to CNN, the event in Belgorod marks the first time that Ukrainian aligned forces have launched a cross-border land operation against Russian targets. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korean novelist Chun Myung-kwan's Whale has been shortlisted for the 2023 International Booker Prize. Whale is the story of an ambitious woman who turns from a mountain village girl with a mute daughter to a small-town entrepreneur. For more on this Korean piece, we're joined by Ms. Beth Hong. She's from the Korea Herald. Welcome to the program.
Hello, it's great to be here today.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Now, first off, the book was first published back in 2004, but it was only recently translated into English. Now, why do you think the book is earning global recognition now, especially after all that 19 years? Is that because of the English translation?
Well, certainly, whenever a literary work is translated into English, it becomes accessible to a much wider audience. But to zoom in on this book in particular, something I've noticed over the past few years is greater interest in Korean fantasy and magical realism. So specifically, works that juxtapose magical realism or fantastical elements with social critique have been attracting more critical attention over the last few years. For example, on the International Booker Prize shortlist last year, we saw the short story collection Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung and translated by Anton Her. It's a collection that incorporates elements of magical realism, horror, and science fiction to highlight patriarchy and capitalism in modern society. And in a similar vein, we see magical realism utilized in Whale to satirize some of the patriarchal and brutally capitalist elements in Korean society, especially in the aftermath of the Korean War. As mentioned earlier, it's a multi-generational saga set on a remote Jeju village in the 1950s and follows the lives of 3 mythical female characters. And this is kind of just a fun aside, but a fun element to consider behind this book's visibility is K-pop band BTS's member RM. RM is actually known for his love of books to the point where there's a website and Twitter account dedicated to his book recommendations. And actually back in 2020, RM mentioned that he wanted to read this book during a live stream. And then the Korean language book resurfaced in a 2021 bookshelf photo and Instagram story. So there's that to consider as well.
Right. Language accessibility has definitely attracted more audiences, but also thanks to RM from BTS. Now, the translator of the book, Kim Ji-young, has also been credited, which speaks about the importance of translation. Now, what makes translation so crucial when enjoying novels and good pieces? I mean, what makes good translation good?
Well, when it comes to literary translations spend countless hours deliberating over style, tone, pace, and cultural nuances that go far beyond the literal word-by-word translation. In the case of Whale, translator Kim Ji-young has said in interviews that she wanted to make sure that Jung Myung-kwan's humor was properly conveyed in English. But we know that humor is actually extremely tricky to translate, and so she had to pay particular attention to the cadence of the jokes and specific word choices to convey the book's satiric tone. And on top of that, Kim Ji-young also reportedly translated a bulk of the work over 10 months in 2020 during peak COVID, which was fueled not only by the lockdown, but by her genuine love for the original book. So I think this gets at what makes a good translation. It's the translator's true desire to convey the spirit of an author's work to a wider audience because the work itself speaks so deeply to them as the translator.
Right, and not only her expertise, but also her passion and also ambitions on translation. Now, this is the 4th time a South Korean author has made it to the international prize with after Hangang's The Vegetarian and The White Book in 2016 and 2018 respectively. Now, what does it say about South Korean novels and their presence in the world that they have proved themselves to be good pieces in any language?
Yeah, I think we can definitely say that Korean literature has moved into the global spotlight in the past decade and gained rightful recognition for being excellent pieces on their own. As actually the host of a podcast about Korean books for an English-speaking audience, I've heard from listeners who are Korean literature fans from as far as the UK and Amsterdam. And in the past 10 years, almost 24 Korean authors have been honored at global literary awards, according to the Literature Translation Institute of Korea. And the LTI estimates that 150 Korean literary works were printed overseas in 27 languages last year with its support. So we're seeing also a much more diverse range of genres being published and recognized on a global scale, from science fiction and fantasy to thrillers and even graphic novels. So we can definitely see the growing presence of Korean books and authors also at festivals around the world. Most recently at this year's Brisbane Writers' Festival in Australia, where South Korea was actually featured as the country of focus.
Right, good translations are always a good news for bookworms and book lovers. All right,
yeah,
thank you.
Right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beth, so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, everyone. See you.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in the tech sector as Facebook parent company Meta has been handed a record fine of $1.3 billion by the European Union for violating data privacy rules. Announced by Ireland's Data Protection Commission on Monday, local time, the fine comes after it was found that Meta continued to transfer data from its EU users to its US-based servers. This despite a court ruling in 2020 that invalidated a previous EU-US data transfer pact. The fine includes an order that Meta's Facebook platform stops sending EU users' data to the US within the next 5 months. The fine tops the previous record EU privacy fine of over $800 million handed to Amazon in 2021. Meta says the fine is unjustified and unnecessary, and that it sets a dangerous precedent. Switching our focus to space now, as Saudi Arabia's first female astronaut has just boarded the International Space Station. Rayana Barnawi, a breast cancer researcher and the first Arab woman to go to space, was welcomed aboard the space station by 7 other astronauts already stationed there. Also on her flight to the ISS were fellow Saudi Ali Arqani, former NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson, and Tennessee businessman John Schaffner. They took a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from Cape Canaveral as part of a private mission organized by Axiom Space. During their time on the ISS, both Barnawi and Arqani will run over a dozen experiments, including research into cancer and how to generate artificial rain on potential settlements on the Moon and Mars. Now on to sports, as South Korea opened its campaign at the Under-20 World Cup in Argentina on Monday with a 2-1 win over France. Korea was the first to draw blood in Mendoza City with a counter-attack goal from Lee Seung-won in the 22nd minute. The Taeguk Warriors extended the lead in the second half with a header by Lee Young-jun, and France did manage to pull 1 goal back thanks to a penalty from Alan Virginius in the 70th minute. South Korea plays Honduras next on Friday at 6 a.m. Korea time. This year marks the 24th edition of the tournament, with the finals slated for June 12th. And finally, Lego has unveiled a life-sized Ferrari made using its signature plastic pieces. The Ferrari Monza SP1 was built in the Czech Republic, with Ferrari designers lending a helping hand. Over 383,000 Lego bricks were used, and the model is now on permanent display at Legoland Billund in Denmark. It took 339 days to complete the model, which weighs over 1,000 kilos. The only non-Lego components used were Ferrari wheels, and a steering wheel.
Good morning. Air quality in central regions has improved, but those in the south and Jeju are still exposed to unsafe levels of yellow dust air pollution, with a dust advisory in place, although things should improve in the afternoon. Now, those in southern provinces will notice much warmer daytime highs, going up to 7 degrees higher than yesterday. The rest of the central regions will be as warm as yesterday. And due to atmospheric instability, rain clouds will be formed, dropping unexpected rain in inland areas with 5 to 20 millimeters expected, along with thunder and lightning at times. Meanwhile, conditions in Gohung in Jeollanam-do province, where South Korea's first homegrown space rocket Nuri will take off tomorrow, is forecast to have promising weather tomorrow. Hot and sunny weather continues through Thursday, so take well care. That's Korea for you. Here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. We'll be back at 12 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.